Thank you.
You're live, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Council and members of the community. I'd like to call this regular council meeting of January 9th, 2024 to order with adoption of the agenda. So I want to make that motion for me. Councilor Cherry, Councilor Stapleton, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting of December 14th. Councilor Devlin, Councilor Lusal, all in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move on to announcements from the mayor. Just want to say that some members of council have now prayed for the snow gods, and the snow has arrived. And for those who are in the snowmobile business today, we're thanking the snow gods. So some of council were able to do a tour. Great job to the Revelstoke Snowmobile Club for what they do for our community. I just want to mention that now the snow is coming down. Be prudent where you park. Our snow crews will be out this evening trying to get things cleaned up. And I just want you to make sure that other vehicles are off the street if you can. Moving on to delegations and presentations, we have Arts Revelstoke here to make a presentation. So, Ms. Palladino, you and your group have the floor.
This little comes here.
Yeah, dongle, I think, Your Worship, if you ask Janet to pull up their presentations and package.
Sure. Janet, can you pull up Arts Revelstoke presentation? That's in the back.
Certainly, one moment, please, Your Worship.
It's a signal with your right hand. See him? Okay. Thank you, Mayor Seltz and Council, for the opportunity to present a review of the cultural services and programming that Arts Revelstoke delivers to our wonderful community. And also, before I jump in, I just would like to introduce our new executive director, Stacey Byrne. She's in the house.
Stacey, congratulations.
As many of you know, I'm a current director and co-chair with Carolyn Gibson of Arts Revelstoke. To begin with, as you scroll through the program, the first item, I believe, is Luna. And the production of this unique festival involves a high level of engagement and collaboration with several nonprofits, School District 19, city staff, small businesses, as well as artists, both local and from much further afield. The programming is diverse and inclusive, both on the presentation side as well as to targeted audiences. The installations represent different genres, levels of accessibility, and cultures that challenge and elevate our community's perception of what they know arts and culture to be. Enjoyed by locals, this festival is a significant shoulder season event for visitors and was supported by Tourism Revelstoke's Thanksgiving Back program this year. Actually, the last couple of years. Our partners do include Tourism Revelstoke, local media, Railway Museum, hotels like the Regent and Sutton Place, the Roxy, and local churches, just to name a few of the partnerships. We're funded through Canada Council, as well as Canadian Heritage and Tourism Revelstoke. In the long run, there are some concerns about the long-term sustainability of this festival. It's got a great reputation. It's an expensive item to pull off in terms of capacity. We certainly have funds in hand to deliver this year, but just to sort of park that for later conversations, maybe. I think the next one is Revenue Tracks or the performance series. Okay. The goal with the performance series is to bring relevant programming that shines a light on issues and perspectives from outside the community. The current series has an Indigenous and broader world focus with a variety of international artists from Australia, Ireland, and the UK, as well as BC artists. These performers take away a great message about the kind of welcoming community we are. The films offered in our series touch on LGBTQ2+ in the community, the Holocaust and our railway heritage. Arts Revelstoke provides some free tickets to various groups to ensure accessibility. For example, Community Connections, the Women's Shelter, and the New Canadian program at Okanagan College. Just want to make sure. So Revy Live Outside is the high-profile summer event, which I'm sure you're all aware of, has been going on for at least the past 30 years. It continues to be well attended by locals. At least 50% of the audience is generally local. And visitors come, and it builds on our reputation as a fun and welcoming destination. The programming supports both emerging and local artists, and we receive applications from artists across Canada to play. The feedback from artists acknowledges the high level of technical support they receive to put on a quality performance, and this puts us on the map for international and national touring artists. Quotes from our audience surveys are, "Music in Revy is amazing. Thank you for putting this on. Revy Live just keeps getting better every year. Really impressed with the diverse audiences and the high caliber of music. Will return and bring back more family members." And I like this one. "I want to live here. What a great downtown. Congrats." Funding support for Revy Live comes from Tourism Revelstoke and the city, and several local businesses also provide meals and accommodation to visiting artists, as well as staying open later to keep the downtown core animated. The next one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Revy Tracks. Okay, Revy Tracks, it's a new program and it's a new series of performances that is assisting the Railway Museum in their goal to sort of reimagine and decolonize their space, making it inviting and accessible to a more diverse and new audience. That's it for Revy Tracks. Circus Camp. This program addresses a high demand for fun, affordable summer activities for children. Circus Camp is a space where sport merges with performance and culture. This week-long program will be offered actually twice in the summer of 2024, and it utilizes the school space during the summer months, both the RPAC as well as the gym. The Performing Arts Center. This valuable cultural asset, I don't know, for maybe some of the newer members around the table, it opened in 2012. It was part of building the new high school, and to the tune of between $3 and $4 million. So I think we need to be mindful that it was a gift. We didn't have to go in this community. We didn't have to go to a referendum or raise the money from our general tax base in order to have the facility we have. So it is an incredibly valuable cultural asset. We manage it. Arts Revelstoke manages it through a memorandum of agreement with School District 19. We pay them a rental fee for the use of the space, and we currently have really no secured source of operating funds. We host theater rentals, allowing additional acts to come to Revelstoke, as well as local community groups who use the theater for their benefit. We also use the space to present to school groups in addition to our evening public performances. The demand has created the need for a full-time theater manager and technical director roles. And sort of last but not least in the range of programs, the special projects this past year, it was a one-off, but Kootenay Sounds, it supported the creation of 24 promotional videos for 24 bands across the Kootenays, putting us on the map as advocates for local as well as regional artists. We present many workshops that we present in the performance series, also do workshops in the schools. Our community events, we sponsor many community events through some funding or access to technical and operational supports. Some examples of those events are the Paddle Fest, the Trash and Show, Canada Day, the Indigenous Spring Gathering, and we support the community choir. We're also a partner in Art Starts with School District 19, presenting arts in schools. And we also provide an annual scholarship to students taking post-secondary courses in the arts. That pretty much brings my comments to a close. I'd encourage all of you to follow our social media so that you're up to speed on what we're doing. I have a final note. I chaired the OCP Cultural Committee, and the adoption of the recent OCP, there's a recommendation in there for a community cultural strategy. And I would hope that you can prioritize this process so we can have a better understanding of the role of arts and culture in our community. Thank you for your kind attention, and we respectfully ask the city to continue to support the meaningful work that we do. Any questions, comments?
Any questions, council? Carol, thank you. Really appreciate what your group does. So I just want to back up just a little bit with RPAC, and you've got a couple of positions there. Are they full-time, these people that are?
It's one position that shares those roles to be able to manage the people who call to say, we want to rent it, running the rental contracts, managing the tech, and then managing our own shows inside the theater as well.
Okay, great.
So that we've
And-
got in-house technical staff,
Perfect.
as opposed to having to hire it out on.
And how are you funded with that?
Right now, it's sort of taken off the top of a variety of programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Councilor Rolando, do you have a question or comment? And-
I was-
Councilor Stephen.
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation.
Any other comments? Seeing none, thank you again, Carol and Stacy, and all of you for what you do at Arts Revelstoke. All the best as you move forward. Thank you. All right, we are going to move on to bylaws, fees and charge amendment bylaw 2375. We have that up for adoption. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councilor Devlin.
Move that fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2375 be adopted.
Second for the motion, please, Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on this motion? We've got 3 readings on it and now ready to adopt. Saying no, Councilor Lima.
Yeah, just triple checking, as is my custom, that nothing's changed since last reading.
That is correct.
Thank you. All right.
Saying no other comments, all in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to staff reports, middle of a housing agreement. So Mr. Simon, is there any presentation or you're just here to answer questions?
Thank you, your worship. There is no formal presentation from staff today. If council does have questions, we have Ms. Hogan, our planning technician. This is her first item in council, will not be her last. So you will start to see her around a lot more. If you have any questions, Ms. Hogan and I are available to answer.
Good, so we should have lots of questions. Just to kind of break the ice. And so we'll need the history of this facility.
Sorry, I didn't catch
Do
that.
you know the history of this facility?
Yes, it's was used as a community care center for a while, and I think since then it's been just a single family dwelling.
All right, and prior to the care facility, it was a single family resident, I'm just teasing. So does someone want to put the motion on the table, please? And then we can ask questions. Councilor Dillon.
Move that the city of Revelstoke housing agreement bylaw number 1573 on 1998 be rescinded.
Second for the motion, please. Okay, I'll second the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? So basically, this was Ms. Hogan, a care facility, and then people bought it and using it for single family residence. And now wish to move on, and so this needs to be rescinded before they can sell a home or whatever. Is that correct?
Yes, that's good.
Any questions, Councilor Staples?
A question through the chair to Ms. Hogan. So my understanding is that, so the property is located at 416 Leach Street. And my understanding is that it's currently being utilized as a, it's got 10 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, and essentially they're all being rented out on a monthly or on a basis to individuals. How is that going to proceed, like moving, if this is passed today, how is that going to change the lease structures for those tenants that are currently in that structure?
To the chair, I think initially when the housing agreement was registered on title, it was being used as a community care center. Since that was just to regulate the tenants that were allowed to lease a room, and they had to be over 50, and I think it was also for caregivers and spouses. I think since then it hasn't been used as a community care center for over 10 years, and since then it's just being used as a single family residence.
Okay,
So I guess through the chair, I think the current use is sort of the focus of my question right now. As is my understanding that the current use isn't as a single family, it's more as a, for lack of a better term, like a boarding house or something to that extent.
And so are you asking for
So-
confirmation on that?
So whether it's confirmation or not, but just how is this going to impact the current residents of that structure moving forward?
Okay. And so if it's being rented out, do you want to?
Through your worship, the standard provisions under the Residential Tenancy Act would still apply to the tenants that are within the building. So that would be regulated through the provincial legislation.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to short circuit that because you were going to give Ms. Hogan that information. All right, does that answer your question, Councilor?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councilor Lemon.
Your worship, through the chair, I guess a question for staff, following on, question or concern regarding, displacing people. This, agreement that was in place, seems to have some sort of an ability to rent room by room, and I'm wondering currently does it have any sort of a designation as similar to like a rooming house or something like that right now? And so this would move it into a single family home. I'm just seeking clarity. I mean, my question is this: are we going to be through this change displacing people who are going to be out of a place to live, who may need affordable housing?
Ms. Hogan?
Through the chair, it's my understanding that it's not being used as a community center anymore, so I don't believe that you would be displacing anybody.
So the question with this, sorry, I'm trying to step on Councilor Orlando, but his comment was because with a care facility, they're able to rent the rooms one by one, and if it's now used as a rooming house, by us removing this designation for care facility, will that displace the people that are there, legally displace the people that are there?
Through your worship, they would still be able to occupy the premises and have it rented out room by room. It would still fall under the Residential Tenancy Act in terms of tenants' rights. The housing agreement kind of sits as a layer on top of it where it regulates the specific users that can go into that space. So the housing agreement actually adds another, I don't want to call it a redundant layer, but another restrictive layer as to who can actually use the space. And one thing to note, this is the first comprehensive development zone that the city ever adopted. So it is a little old and quite antiquated.
Right.
And when we're doing the zoning bylaw comprehensive rewrite, there's a very high likelihood that that zone would be taken away and it would be given a standard residential zone where community care facility group home is already a permitted use. So they would be allowed to undertake it. The best we can ascertain is that this housing agreement was used to facilitate the use of the premises as a community care facility because that use wasn't widely spread within the zoning bylaw. Since then, amendments have been undertaken so that that use is widely spread. All of our residential zones, you're allowed to do community care facility group home. So there isn't any issue with anyone using a house for that purpose.
So our rescinding this won't have any impact on those people unless, of course, this house gets sold and somebody buys it and says, hey, I want to live there by myself, or I've got a family of 10 or whatever.
To your worship, yes, the standard provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act would apply. And even right now, the housing agreement wouldn't restrict someone from doing that.
Okay, all right, good. Any other comments or questions? Councilor Orlando, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, your worship, my question is, with the housing agreement, prevent the sale? I guess, for background, has there been any attempt made to sell the house? Has it been listed recently? And then changed to, remove this? I don't know if, anyone on council has any further information on this?
Councilor Chang?
Thanks, Worship. I got some information on this. The house was purchased, I can't remember quite the year. If, I'll let somebody else fill me in on that. The house was listed a few months back. Title search was pulled on the property. It found out that the housing agreement was on there. They were not aware of it when they purchased the home previously. They removed the listing to remove until the housing agreement could be removed. And attempt to do that, here we are. It should be noted that the way it's currently been operating since the current owners have owned the place is contravening to this housing agreement. If this housing agreement stays on, everybody, and was enforced, every tenant inside that home right now would have to.
So any other questions or confirmation before I call the question? Councilor Lund.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'm not gonna split this, just sort of a feeling that I don't really have enough information. It seems like there's quite a bit of backstory. So for example, it's not being operated the way it was supposed to be in what has been described by staff as a comprehensive our original comprehensive development zone. And I just feel like I don't have enough information about the impact that it would have on tenants there. The details, I read through the report. I do have additional background as this was before the Housing Society, yeah, just right now, I just really don't feel like I have enough information. My worry is I'm going to be through doing this inadvertently leading to people having to leave their affordable housing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. So years ago, this was called Herbert House. This was in the, I would call an extended care facility. I was in that home many times over the years with people who had lived there and loved to the end of their lives. Brought in for a specific reason, because there really wasn't that kind of care facility in our community at the time. So these people that own it now bought this, not knowing that this agreement was still in place, would like to list and sell their home, but need this agreement removed so that they can move forward. I don't believe the intention of council is to handcuff them to not be able to move forward with what they want. But by the same token, they put the proposal before us, and our staff have given us the explanation. So any other comments or questions from council regarding removal of this? Councilor Chair.
Thanks, Worship. I just want to make the same comment earlier. If this housing agreement stays on as enforced, every tenant that currently resides in the house would have to leave. They are operating in contravention of this housing agreement as of right now, and have been since taking ownership of the place, because they did not know that this housing agreement was in place.
Okay. Councilor Stickler.
Can Councilor Cherry elaborate as to how the housing is currently being operated?
Long-term rentals.
Councilor Roman.
Your Worship, my understanding that it was a single family residence.
Prior to being a care facility with single family residence. And then since then, rooms have been rented out one by one, apparently.
Your Worship, sorry, I should be more precise in my wording. My understanding from verbal discussion now that it was being operated as a single family residence. I'm prepared to put an alternate resolution before council if council is willing to entertain it. As of right now, I just feel like I don't have enough information to support this. If council's willing to entertain that.
Okay, let me just go to Councilor Palmer had his hand up, so I'd like to hear from him. Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah, so just a question that came up through the discussion. So in the housing agreement, notwithstanding that it may not be complying to the housing agreement right now, but under the housing agreement, I was searching for it, but I believe it was when that agreement was put in place, it was a single family, but it had changed to a boarding house. And so I'm just wondering, you know, there's a comprehensive development zone. If there wasn't the CD zone, if that's taken out, then would this become a R1, a residential, and then the essential use of a boarding house right now be eliminated? So I guess it's just a little bit further to, I didn't really catch this before, but further to Councillor Orlando's concerns that, okay, this this is providing a long-term accommodation currently, and what I'm hearing is it's non-compliant. However, it is providing a long-term accommodation. And then with the removal of this housing agreement, then the sale will go through, and it could potentially displace over time more affordable units as a boarding house. I don't have a strong opinion right now, but I'm just trying to get if I have that correct, and maybe the planner could elaborate if I'm making sense.
Great, appreciate that. Ms. Morgan or Mr. Simon, care to elaborate?
Through your worship, Councillor Palmer, so just trying to understand the question. Are you asking whether or not boarding and lodging is a permitted use, or as part of the future zoning bylaw comprehensive rewrite, if it's likely that the CD zone would change to a standard R1 zone, in which case is boarding and lodging a permitted use in the R1 zone?
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah, through to the planner. So what I'm seeing is it's in the whereas statement in the housing agreement. The owner has requested the existing use of land be changed from a single family. Did I lose? Am I still
No,
there?
you're still here. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The owner has requested the existing use of the land be changed from single family residence to a rooming house. And maybe it's a little bit of a red herring, but if this was not under the comprehensive development zone, I'm assuming both uses are permitted, or only as a rooming house right now?
Through your worship, accessory boarding to the principal owner, occupant to a maximum of 8 dwelling units, desiring mutual support and independent living, and not licensed as a care facility of any sort. Federal, provincial, or other agency or ministry is what the principal use is right now. As you can see, it's a mouthful. It's convoluted. It's confusing. So when staff were digging through the history of this, our understanding is they were seeking to rezone the property to allow for a community care facility, because community care facility was not permitted within our standard residential zones. As a condition of that rezoning, the city at the time required a housing agreement to ensure that it was going to be used as such. And within that housing agreement, it stipulates that if it is no longer used as such, the owner can apply to discharge the housing agreement bylaw, as they are doing right now. As we re-examine the zoning of the properties as part of the zoning bylaw comprehensive review, things have progressed where community care facility, group home, boarding and lodging are standard permitted uses within our residential zones. So as we look to update the zoning bylaw, it is very likely this CD zone will be scrapped. It will have a standard residential zoning applied to it, where they can still use it as a boarding house, they can use it as a community care facility, they can use it as a group home.
Perfect. Thank you for that comment. That gets us to that. Any follow-up, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, also thank you for that. So basically, in the wisdom of the day, they did the best to make a use that was needed at that time. Things have changed, zoning stuff has changed, and now it's kind of a mess somewhat right now, is I guess my interpretation of, and this is cleaning it up possibly a little bit.
Now, Councillor Orlando, does this clarify things for you?
Not entirely, because you know, again, my primary concern is the people who are there and what is going on. I think what will happen to them as a result of this decision. One of the points of the report is that this is no longer being enforced or being used in this manner, and that the people who purchased it did not know that. But you know, when you enter into a real estate transaction, it's incumbent upon you to inform yourself of these things. And yeah, my primary concern is that social consideration of people who may be out on the street of an unaffordable option, so that's my main concern here. So.
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, just for clarity, now that staff are aware that this housing agreement is registered on title and the owner has brought it to staff's attention as to how the premises is being used in contravention of that housing agreement, if this isn't discharged, staff will have to follow up with the owner to ensure compliance with the housing agreement, which could result in potential displacement. And then we're going to be in a very murky scenario where what provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act apply to the existing tenants that have lease agreements with the owner, and how does that relate to the executed housing agreement? So
So
it's very important because in the housing agreement, it stipulates if the premises are no longer being used as such for the care facility, then they got to apply to discharge. Because if they don't discharge, then the city needs to enforce the provisions of that housing agreement, which could result in displacement. Now, whether an owner chooses to sell a property, and if they have family move into it and under the RTA, if they're allowed to displace residents as a result, that's not something that we have control over. But with this housing agreement, if it isn't discharged, staff will have to follow up with the owner to ensure adherence to that housing agreement.
Thank you for that clarification. That makes it really easy for me to make a decision because this is probably in the best interests of the homeowner and those who are there. As currently, in my mind. Councilor Stephanus, did you have further comment?
No, I didn't. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments regarding this as we move forward? So are you okay with me, Councilor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I'm not wanting to prolong it, but I guess there's one comment and one question. I'll make both questions, I guess. So further to what the planner was saying, depending on the length of time, it's possible the current use is legal non-compliant, possibly, maybe not. But my question is through to Councillor Orlando. I'm curious to know what your alternative proposal is to what's on the table right now.
Sure, Orlando.
My thought was referral to maybe social development committee to find out a little bit more about the background and the implications, and for example, if people are going to be displaced as a result of our decision, to prepare for that and have some sort of an outreach program in place and have that referred back to council for input through a social lens.
Do you have comment, follow up on that, Councilor Palmer?
I'm going to be supporting the motion as it is on the table. It's a little bit of a difficult one, but I'll be supporting it as it is.
Good. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I will call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Orlando is in opposition. Balance of council is in favor. This motion has passed. Moving on to item number 2. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Devlin.
Move that the discharge of housing agreement bylaw notation KN 38144 on block 4, section 26, township 23, range 2, west of the 6th meridian, Kootenai District Plan 4375 be authorized.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Lucelle. Any further discussion on this, discharging this housing agreement that we just agreed to do? Saying no comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Orlando's in opposition. Balance of council is in favor. This motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Appreciate your input. All right, we are moving on to item B, new legislation planning department update. And any presentation, Mr. Simon, regarding Johnson Heights?
Through your worship, yes, we do have a presentation. If you would like to see, we've kind of combined both items 11B and 11C into one presentation because there is a lot of relation between them, if that is permissible by council.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Trying to get you guys out of here sooner. So I'll share my screen here. So thank you, council. I know we appreciate it. I know the specific resolution from council is that we had a special committee of the whole meeting to discuss short-term rental, but because we didn't have much on the January 9th agenda, and there is an issue of timeliness with respect to future public information sessions for the short-term rental legislation, we wanted to make sure that we were on this as soon as possible to respond to the needs of the community, to dispel any misinformation out there. So today, the presentation we'll be giving is a general planning update in the context of monumental legislative changes that have occurred throughout October and November. It really is about 10 years worth of legislation in a matter of 1 month that the province has introduced. So it's quite substantial and it does impact Revelstoke. So today is all about how are we going to address Bill 35, 44, and 46 that everyone's heard so much about. So to start off, we're going to start at the top. We're going to go in reverse order in terms of the detail of the legislation and the context of how much conversation it's probably going to warrant. So we'll start off with a brief overview of Bill 46, which is the DCC and amenity cost charge legislation that was announced. Then we'll get into an overview of Bill 44, which is the small scale multi-unit housing legislation that was introduced in November. And then we'll conclude with the discussion and staff recommendation from item 11B. And then we'll move into item 11C and discuss Bill 35 for short-term rental and conclude with the discussion and staff recommendation for the item 11C. Any questions, anything throughout, feel free to interrupt and interject. This is really important that we have a wholesome conversation about these pieces of legislation. They are quite substantial. So Bill 46, this is all about development financing. So there's been a lot of challenges with a lack of tools available to local government with respect to development financing. So Bill 46 introduces substantial changes to try and address some of the concerns that municipalities have had over the decades in BC. So the legislation received royal assent on November 30th. In a nutshell, it makes changes to the existing development cost charge legislation. So instead of collecting fees just for water, sewer, roads, and parks, we're now allowed to collect fees for solid waste and recycling facilities, fire halls, as well as police stations. So it's really expanded the scope of what DCCs can be collected for. In addition to that, they've introduced a new charge called an amenity cost charge. It's implemented very similar to a development cost charge. It needs to be implemented via bylaw. The fees are applicable at building permit and subdivision stage, and it's intended to capture the cost that additional population is having proportionately on public amenities, things like recreational facilities, other public facilities, daycares, libraries, other recreational facilities as well. So they need to be implemented via bylaw, and again, charge for recreational facilities, libraries, daycares, and other public amenities. And I will note that there is some discussion happening behind the scenes as to whether or not affordable housing can be captured as a public amenity. My understanding is right now that wasn't the intent of the legislation. However, there are still those conversations, and what the province has told us is that we can expect further changes on the affordable housing front. So definitely keep your ear to the ground for that, and staff will be in touch should there be changes. So what are the implications for Revelstoke? Well, Mr. Black and his team are currently working on an update to the development cost charge bylaw. So looking at how these additional tools can be incorporated into the city's DCC framework will be examined as part of that project. So we do recommend that real robust and further discussion on the granular details of this legislation would be occurring more so through that project, because that is the most appropriate avenue. But before we move on to Bill 44, is there any immediate questions or comments or concerns that Mr. Black and I can answer regarding Bill 46?
Councilor Listen.
Thank you, Mayor Schultz. With the DCCs for fire halls and police, is that going towards infrastructure? Can that go towards operating costs, or can those go to any of those?
Through your worship to Councilor Lucio, our understanding is that it would go towards the actual building itself.
Okay.
And not with respect to the operating, because just think of it similar to how DCCs are collected for storm, water, and roads. It's to pay for the hard infrastructure, the pipes that are in the ground. So when we extend that type of philosophy to fire halls and police stations, it's to pay for the building itself that's going to house them, not necessarily to pay for the ongoing staff that's going to take to run them.
Okay, thank you.
But we are still waiting on them to update the DCC guide, which is quite outdated now, or at least details should be included.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, carry on. Thank you.
So Bill 44, just to throw another acronym at you, SSMUH, small scale multi-unit housing. You're going to hear that a bunch over the next 6 months as we work on zoning amendments to address this legislation. So the bill received royal assent on November 30th, 2023. So it is in force. It involves significant amendments to the Local Government Act. Current zones that only allow for single detached and 2-unit dwellings as of December 13th, 2023 need to be amended. We need to accommodate a minimum of 3 units on lots that are 280 square meters or less. So to give you some context, and we threw the Imperial in there, because we know that there's some of us that do like the Imperial. Those small 25 by 100-foot lots that we have scattered throughout central Revelstoke, the old remnants where you got a house that might be spread across 3 of them or spread across 2 of them, that is a 232 square meter lot. So you can picture these narrow lots where council has seen variances for minimum lot width and minimum setback requirements to build one single family dwelling. We now need to enable 3 units on this size of lot within the city. So quite substantial. And we need to allow 4 units on lots greater than 280 square meters. So again, for some context, one of the most recent developments across from the hospital, the Williams Gate development, a lot of the single family lots in there are at 550 square meters. So imagine a lot half that size being able to accommodate 4 units. And one of the key things with this legislation is we can't implement overly restrictive zoning rules, such as setback requirements, lot coverage requirements, how much of a lot a building can take up, that would prohibit the objectives of the legislation to be met.
Councilor Stiglitz.
Does that include parking?
Through your worship, yes, parking would be included in there, and the province has introduced changes for parking for development in proximity to transit. And we'll get to that in a second, but it shouldn't impact Revelstoke. But again, if we have regulations, our understanding that are overly prohibitive, beat the intent of the legislation, then they could be subject to challenge.
Councilor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm curious how Bearland stratas are going to be affected.
So through your worship, Bearland stratas. A Bearland strata that is subdivided to accommodate individual strata lots with some common property like a road would still be subject to this. When you start getting into building stratas, that's the multi-unit buildings where they wouldn't be impacted by this legislation. But Bearland stratas that are intended for single family and 2 family development, they would certainly be impacted if they are zoned for single family or duplexes currently.
Cool.
Councilor Cherry, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship, through the chair. With the 3 units on 280 square meters or less, how does that affect, how's that gonna affect setbacks into neighboring properties? The potential need for non-combustible building materials? Is there any information on that at all as of yet?
Mr. Sun.
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, there will be impacts. Higher building standards to actually achieve this with respect to fire separation from adjacent properties will need to be met. And we will also really need to think carefully about our setback requirements and other corresponding development regulations so that we're walking a fine line between not intentionally negating the intent of the legislation. So we have to accommodate it, but still making sure that we're addressing privacy concerns, making sure that there is some usable space on these properties. So there's all these nuanced details that we have to work through. But right now, for the purpose of addressing the legislation, just think of it as this is the floor that we are mandated to accommodate now.
Okay, future issue is, when we start talking about non-combustible building materials, construction applications, that's going to significantly increase the price to build anything. So how that would essentially defeat part of the purpose of having more affordable housing units or more housing units. The cost is going to skyrocket an extra $200 per square foot. But I guess the city's not building, we're just working with what we have.
And through your worship, I would note that it's a very astute point, and it's certainly something for the future development community to be aware of and to try and find avenues to reduce those costs.
Be some new products coming on the market to get this step forward. So Councilor Lucio.
Thank you, Schultz. I just have a question when it comes to like stratified trailer parks. Would they have to accommodate up to 3 units on their lots as well?
Through your worship to Councilor Lucio, excellent question. So a standard trailer park, a standard manufactured home park where you have 3 dozen manufactured homes on one parcel of land, they are exempt from the legislation. But when we start getting into the stratification of a manufactured home park, that does raise an interesting question, because right now, Johnson Heights is an example to make this a little bit more practical. You're permitted a single family dwelling there, you're permitted a duplex there, and you're permitted to have a manufactured home. The legislation and the policy guidance that the province has released has indicated that manufactured home parks are exempt from this. If you have manufactured home park zoning, you're exempt. But the legislation currently doesn't contemplate a manufactured home park zoning that enables single family dwellings and duplexes like our Johnson Heights does, which is serving as a bit of a model under the recent policy that council adopted should someone wish to stratify a manufactured home park.
So this is actually a question that we have for the province, for that specific type of zoning. Would they now need to accommodate 4 units on these lots? Very good question.
Wow, that's gonna be a cluster. Councilman,
Yeah, thank you. I guess another one coming to parking requirements. If we can't have parking requirements when it comes to the development, are we gonna have to require off-street parking as we try to accommodate more units and look towards snow removal? Just an issue I see coming up in the future.
Your worship, our understanding right now is that the prohibition on imposing minimum parking requirements is only applicable for properties that are in proximity to transit. That meets the definition of frequent transit service, which is a stop every 15 minutes, which we don't have any in the community that consistently meet that definition. So it shouldn't be applicable to us right now, but all great questions that planning staff have, very similar questions to our provincial counterparts as well, so that we can implement this appropriately.
Councilor Lennon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. My question is more of a general one. What concerns does planning department staff have about since we're on the Bill 44 slide, that they would like or would require direction from council over? What sort of, just general question, what sort of questions are you gonna be wanting us to consider or need us to consider as we go through this process?
Through your worship, Councilor Orlando, very much appreciated from the planning and engineering department's perspective. I think the biggest thing with respect to council communication out in the public is there's nuance to all this and understanding that there is still a process that the members of the public will need to go through. What we are anticipating as a result of this is more what we call small scale, or for lack of a better word, mom and pop style developers wanting to come in and say, well, the province has changed legislation. I can chop my lot into 2 and build 4 units on each and make a whole bunch of money, without understanding that there's still servicing requirements, there's still development regulations you need to abide by. So really communicating effectively that, yes, this is a general, baseline entitlement, but there's still other checks and balances as you go through the process to make sure you have enough parking, you meet height, you meet setbacks, you need development permits for some of the stuff. You got to still verify servicing. So just making sure that, it's still the onus of an applicant to address those items and not the onus of the city to do that work for them, which is what we deal with quite frequently in planning.
Yeah, Your Worship, if I just follow up with an observation, yeah, certainly as we've had a lot more development activity ramping up consistently over the past 15 years. That's one of the transitions we've had to make, in that back in the old days, development services staff were, dotting the i's and crossing the t's for applications and that kind of stuff. And there was sort of a bit of a weaning process towards having an understanding that that's not their job and it's your job to complete all of those things yourself. So yeah, I certainly understand that and understand that the level of complexity and the volume that the development services department is dealing with just planning documents and with volume of applications means that that's not something that it's not something to take on lightly.
Through your worship, just one additional comment. Planning staff, we are here to administer a consistent and equitable process for everyone. We can't pick favorites and help someone else out more than other people. And also council is the decision maker in so many scenarios. So it's not ethical or appropriate for planning staff to say, well, if you do this, we'll support your proposal, and then you go ahead. We need to administer the bylaws fairly, equitably, consistently, so that everyone has the same process that they go through to get to council as the respective decision maker.
Councilor Chair.
Thanks, Worship. Through the chair, just a quick question. Has there been any conversations about whether or not the units need to be separately titled?
Through your worship, they would not need to be separately titled.
Can they be?
They could be.
Thank you.
Does that open another can of worms? I'm gonna ask that question without wanting to go down a rabbit hole here, but.
Through your worship, we anticipate, as always, that there will be some creative individuals that will try and find some rabbit holes that lead to creative situations. Generally speaking, if you're going to throw 4 units on a lot, they're going to be connected in some way, shape, or form. So you're talking a building strata there. If you have a lot that's big enough, that's 1,000 square meters, you want to chop it up into 2 and put 4 units on each, and then you got 2 different building stratas. that's something that could potentially, in theory, be supported under the legislative changes now.
Council Palmer?
Yeah, just further to that question, essentially, what our R1 zoning right now will be able to accommodate triplexes or fourplexes, depending on the size of the lot going ahead. Is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. If it's over 280 square meters, zoned R1, you would be permitted to have 4 units on there. Could be 2 units below, 2 units above, could be 4 row houses, could be a variety of different build forms.
And so that the further to that, then through the chair, the implications for the public to understand, especially those in R1 zoning areas or R2, is over time they can anticipate triplexes. So in an area that right now is all single family residential, somebody may choose to tear them down and either renovate or tear them down and create triplexes or fourplexes.
Simon, Cullen?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. And I will note that this isn't a monumental shift in the direction that we are already going under our official community plan. The difference is these become baseline entitlements. What our hope was prior to the introduction of this legislation was with the OCP where low density supports up to 4 units on a lot or even potentially 5 or 6, even in proximity to transit, that we would have corresponding low density residential zones in our zoning bylaw that people could rezone to. So there's still a public process and that council is still the decision maker. This has essentially taken that out of our hands where now we have to grant it as an entitlement. So we wanted to have a very efficient process to still expedite those types of applications, but make sure that the public was aware there's public notice signs and that council is the decision maker. Unfortunately, the province has squashed it.
Right. Good. Councilor Luciano, you have a question?
Yeah, just one more. I'm not sure if we've covered it yet, but it said it had to be hooked up to sewer and water. So does this doesn't apply to Big Eddy? And then how does this affect Arrow Heights?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. So you need to be hooked into both municipal water and sewer. And we are scratching our heads right now trying to figure out how we can structure that in the zoning bylaw so that it is clear for all members of the public when they are navigating the bylaw. So they would not be entitled to the same number of units, but we need to structure it in a way where it's a condition of use within the specific zone so that if sewer is ever extended to those properties, that they're automatically granted the entitlement. And that's a conversation that when we bring forward the specific zoning amendments, the council still wants to accommodate up to 4 units on a lot that only has municipal water, like the Eddy and certain parts of Arrow Heights, and no municipal sewer, and leave it up to the owner to demonstrate adequate servicing as per our servicing bylaws. We can grant those entitlements, certainly, but that will be a council decision to be made that would be beyond the legislative minimum requirements.
Thank you for that comment. Councilor Cherry?
Thanks, your worship, through the chair. In that scenario, wouldn't it be the province again or the environmental authority that would be granting that?
Through your worship, generally speaking, interior health approval is required for any septic improvements.
So how do we? Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All right, carrying on, Mr. Simon, thank you.
So just as a brief example, you guys have this in your package in the presentation there, but just to show you what we're really talking about here, when you look at the triangular area that's bounded by Townley 4th and Downey Street, you're looking at 430 to 550 square meter lots there. These would all be permitted to have 4 units per lot now, legislation. Looking in central Revelstoke here, 4th, 5th, and 6th Street, right by MacArthur and Orton Avenue, you can see how many of these small sliver lots that we have that are 25 by 100 feet. And, it won't be feasible on every lot, of course, but it is important that the public and council really starts to understand that this is a requirement and we have to accommodate it. And we will see some units inevitably on these small lots as they come in where people are trying to maximize density.
Sure.
Yes, thanks, your worship. I'm trying to go off memory here. Through the chair, what is our current minimum lot size for subdivision as of right now in comparison to what the provincial legislation is?
Through your worship, so the provincial legislation doesn't establish a minimum lot size. It just says for lots over 280 square meters, you need to have 4 units, lots under 280 square meters. So we could still have a minimum lot size, but for all of these what we could call legacy lots that are already existing, we have to accommodate the density on them. It doesn't mean we need to allow a lot that's, 1,000 square meters to be subdivided into 280 square meter lots, have 3 units per lot. We can still have a minimum lot size. But again, this gets into the realm of, are we introducing regulations that are defeating the intent of the legislation? So right now, our minimum lot size, 550 square meters for R1, and then 400 square meters for R2, R2A.
Is that with the party wall subdivision?
Through worship, it would be 200 square meters for the R2 duplexes with party wall subdivision.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm getting kind of technical. I apologize.
That's okay. I was gonna ask some other questions, but I'm gonna go, let's let this legislation go through and talk about that in the future.
Thank you, Your Worship. So continuing on here, the image on the right, the province is actually coming out with some pre-approved building designs. This is just an example of, it's not specifically designed, but how the configuration could ultimately look on some of the lots. So some nice pretty colors in there. The planners really enjoyed pretty colors on all of our pictures. Some other important components of the legislation, the minimum density provisions don't apply to the following. So our heritage conservation area, it's a very important distinction. The legislation establishes heritage protected properties in different ways. Under section 611 of the Local Government Act, you can protect a specific building, which we do for the Mountain View School building, where the old school eatery is. If we have those protected buildings, the legislation does not apply to them. Our heritage conservation area in central Revelstoke is established under section 615 of the Local Government Act. So our understanding is that this legislation is applicable to the properties within the heritage conservation area. It's very important. It's not applicable, as Councillor Lucio had indicated, to properties that are not connected to both municipal and water and sewer. And it's also not applicable where a private building scheme, I'll note that the city does not enforce these. It is up to the individual owners that are subject to the building scheme to enforce it through civil means. But if a private building scheme says you're only allowed 1 unit, then that would prevail over the provincial legislation. And owners, the way the provincial manual is set up is an owner's first obligation is to the private building scheme that is subject to their property.
Councillor Orlando.
Yes, a question regarding heritage in general for based on your presentation through the chair. What do you think that means for the future of Revelstoke Station? What are we going to see? And I could be wrong, but I think in general, the public kind of has some misconceptions about what the heritage designation is. So for example, one thing I often hear is, oh, you can't build anything there, you can't change anything there. That's not the case. But I just to put it out there, when you see what is in the legislation, what do you think we should anticipate for the heritage area? What's going to happen on the ground in real terms?
Through your worship, Councillor Orlando, excellent question. We will see development pressure as a result. There's no doubt about it. We have buildings within the heritage conservation area that are, some of them are in excellent shape and have been maintained meticulously over the years, and some of them not so much. So they will certainly have pressure to redevelop. The preference of the planning group is obviously to maintain the heritage area as best as we possibly can to reflect those heritage values. We're very excited, and it's been a long time coming, but we're expecting it over the next couple of months to be brought to council, the Heritage Management Plan. Really, really key that we start building up the heritage program in the city to provide clarity to what it means when you're in the heritage conservation area. What benefits do you get from it? And what does it mean if you want to do some work on your property, porch replacement, or if you want to redevelop entirely? How do you reflect those heritage characteristics so that we aren't losing that as we see new projects come online? So it's an excellent point, and we're really excited. And when we bring the heritage management plan forward, Denise Cook, Ms. Cook, who's been working with us on it, her and her colleagues from the heritage realm have been examining this legislation and what it means for heritage. So it'll be a really interesting conversation to have at that time as well. But certainly there are implications for the build form of the heritage area.
Thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship. With this diagram up, it's kind of triggered a quick question through Chair, Mr. Simon. The middle right photo, yes. Under the current bylaws, I don't think this is possible, but under the new provincial legislation, could that be built like that with a double party wall subdivision, four different titles on that property?
Through worship, it would be a building strata. So it would be a stratified property with some common property and then 4 separate strata units on there. But where the parking is, I don't know.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much, through your worship, I wouldn't put too much, stock into these images. It's just an example of how it could potentially be accommodated on some of these small lots.
I asked because this is one of the pre-approved designs that was in Kelowna in the last few years, but nobody couldn't get an answer on whether they were separately titled or not.
Yeah, through your worship, so they would all be separately titled, it would be a building strata, or if someone chose to, you could just have one property with 4 units on there that they're all rented, but then you can't sell them independently, so it would need to be stratified.
Thank you.
So. Last piece of the Bill 44 before we get into some of the implications, some other things that have come out as a result of this. Province will be introducing in January, February this year, a standardized process for housing needs reports that we need to complete. Typically, we do these every 5 years. Typically we do them to plan for the next 5 years of projected housing need. We now need to do them to project for the next 20 years of housing need. Province will come up with a standardized process of how these housing needs reports are supposed to be done. OCPs need to be updated every 5 years based on the approved housing needs reports. Zoning bylaws need to better align with your OCP land use designation map to pre-zone properties. This kind of ties into the previous conversation under Bill 46. We pre-zone, we lose out on our opportunity to collect amenities. But if we have an amenity cost charge bylaw, we might not be losing out so much. We have to figure that out. But this will be required. The province wants to see properties pre-zoned to eliminate or reduce at least the site-specific rezoning application process. And lastly, we are restricted or prohibited, I believe is the wording in the legislation, from holding a public hearing for a residential rezoning application or a mixed-use rezoning application where at least 50% of the development is comprised of residential units. What that 50% means, if it's based on gross floor area, those are details that we don't know at this time, but we will be prohibited from holding it. I will note for council, even though we're not able to hold public hearings, the development approval procedures bylaw you just adopted, you are able to direct applicants to do public information sessions so that we can still have some level of public engagement. Very important to understand as a tool to be able to implement.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just through the chair, does that mean that every property is also going to be essentially upzoned to be mixed use?
Through your worship, it wouldn't be for mixed use. It would be to allow for up to 3 or 4 units, depending on the size of the lot. And that's just for the single family and the 2 family zoning properties.
Sorry, you said that there was no, sorry, just to clarify, you mentioned that there wouldn't be public hearings for mixed use.
Through worship, so if we have an application, so for instance, our official community plan, our land use map, we have properties that are designated in the OCP mixed use. All of downtown is designated mixed use. If someone wanted to come in and rezone from commercial to commercial/residential, as long as the project is at least 50% residential, we're not allowed to hold a public hearing. But it still needs to align with the OCP.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And our OCP is very clear in where a mixed use project is supported and where only residential is supported. So we're good there.
Councilor Orlando.
Hey, Your Worship, just a question regarding these requirements listed here and other similar ones. These are, there are current requirements. Oftentimes they're not met when it comes to updating planning documents, etc. Is this any different? Are they gonna ding us or what? Yeah.
Your Worship, Councilor Orlando, again, good question. We are required after, and we'll get to the timeline, but as of June 30th is our deadline for addressing the immediate legislation of 3 to 4 units per lot. There is a process that we have to go through to verify with the Ministry of Housing that we have accomplished that. And what the Ministry of Housing has released in their policy guidance is if we don't do that, then essentially by the end of the year, they are going to start issuing orders to basically force us to amend our zoning bylaws. So they seem to be quite adamant that this will be happening regardless of local resistance. Staff's recommendation is certainly to do our best to work within those timelines, and the exemptions to meeting the specified timelines are minimal. The only exemptions that exist are really if you don't have the infrastructure capacity to support it. And if that's the case, then you need to be very detailed in what infrastructure is missing and what your plan is to address that infrastructure deficit in a very short order to ultimately accommodate the legislation.
Councilor Stichler.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Simon. Curious on how this impacts the overall workload of the planning department. Seems like an awful lot is being downloaded onto you guys. And like your capacity right now, where's your bandwidth? What,
Through your worship, Councillor Stabeners, we are oversubscribed for 2024 when we account for the legislative changes, certainly. I will note that we feel we're in a good spot because we've already done so much work on this comprehensive zoning bylaw review. We will have to bring forward amendments in advance of that full comprehensive rewrite to address the June 30th deadline. We don't want to rush the comprehensive rewrite. It's such a big undertaking and the public really needs to understand what the changes are, and they need to be given the opportunity to come in and meet with us and say, my property's on this, it's changed to this, what does it mean for me? And how does the provincial legislation tie into it? So we're confident that we can meet it all, but we need to be really streamlined and prioritized for 2024 in order to address this.
Councillor London.
Just, I guess, a comment through the chair. Reserving all comments on the changes that the provincial government has made. I'd like to just sort of make more of a focused comment on, everyone, like, there are NIMBY gatekeeping councils in BC, and people can pass judgment on who's doing what and whatnot. That aside, I think it's one of the key points that's been lost in this conversation is that when you point fingers at whatever council somewhere else or here, and I'm not saying we're this, I think that the conversation misses the fact that there is so much work to do that is provincial requirements. So we are having to steer this whole ship around to make all of these changes, and this has really nothing to do with any sort of gatekeeping or blocking or whatever. Like the requirements are really huge on the other side. So I guess my thought and feeling is, I know there has been some funding that helps us a little bit with these changes, but to hit the ball back into the other side of the court, it would be great if the province could commit to upholding their end of the bargain, and that that they make it easier, doesn't take so long, reduce bureaucracy on their end as we do these things. I don't know where they're at. I'm not asking staff to comment on that, but I just would like to make the observation that so much of what takes so long about getting these plans in place, maintaining these plans, is not rooted in the city, in the municipal government, or any municipal government. It's in us trying to follow provincial legislation and provincial rules going through here. So I guess my statement would be, I hope they're putting resources towards helping us get this in place and continue to do so with every development application and everything that we're going through, infrastructure as well. So.
All right, carry on.
So general timeline, January 2024. They're going to release guidance to us on completing housing needs report, standardized the process. We did already receive details on the funding. Mr. Parliament was happy to share with us that we did receive $187,000. It will be coming in by the end of January. It's intended to help hire staff, hire consultants to support implementation of the legislation, which we are already ahead of. June 30th, as stated, that is our deadline to make sure that we change zoning requirements to accommodate 3 to 4 units per lot. June, July of 2024, that's when all of the OCP review update instructions will be provided to local government. January 1st, 2025, we have to have our housing needs assessment completed by then, which we're already planning to do it in 2024. So the timing works out well for us. And then December 31st, 2025, our OCP and zoning bylaw needs to be updated by then based on the findings of that housing needs report. It is a lot in here and it's a lot of bylaws, but I will note the work that council has endorsed and the communities participated in over the last couple of years has set us up to be in a much better position than a lot of other municipalities would be in. Our housing needs report that we did a brief update to last year, our OCP, our housing action plan, so much of the baseline work has already been done. So there's still going to be a lot of work, but we're in a decent spot, I would say. So just wrapping up the discussion for Bill 44 and 46. 46, we recommend exploring this further as part of the DCC project that Mr. Black and his team are working on. With Bill 44, we will need to bring forward amendments before June 30th, 2024 to comply with the legislation. This will be in advance of the comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite. And again, with that change, we are prohibited from holding a public hearing. So we can talk about it at a later date, but staff will certainly be recommending that in terms of engaging the public, we go on the inform end Because if we go out and we start doing public engagement and asking for feedback on things that we don't have control over, I think it will cause frustration with the community, and rightfully so. Planning department currently has 13 projects that are either not initiated, ongoing, or near completion for 2024, in addition to our standard day-to-day activities that we're required to allocate time towards. So capacity is allocated for 2024, and you see in the staff recommendation, two pieces in there, and the first piece we haven't really touched upon yet, so I'll speak to it a little bit now, if that's okay. The Johnson Heights neighborhood plan has been on the back burner, delayed for some time. It was originally intended with started with great intentions. It's going to be a developer funded plan. Everyone was brought together to make it work. All the developers kind of fell by the wayside except for one. The city was investing money in it through the previous OCP budget for the comprehensive rewrite. And it was never a specific project that was allocated in the department work plan. And it was never specifically budgeted for as well. So what staff's recommendation is that we cancel this plan. There's no way we would be able to get to it in 2024, to be fully transparent. And the necessity for the neighborhood plan with the development interest that has fallen by the wayside, except for one developer within Johnson Heights, doesn't really lead to this plan being required right now. And lastly, and most importantly, the development approval procedures bylaw that council recently updated brought in a whole new process for what we call comprehensive development plans. Just think of them as master plans for an entire site, a large site that we're going to see significant development on. That is a developer funded plan, and through that process, the developer works with staff to prepare terms of reference for completion of the plan. That terms of reference comes to council. Council endorses the terms of reference, and then the developer gets underway. A lot of public engagement, notification through that process. So when we see comprehensive development proposed in Johnson Heights, staff would recommend leveraging that process that would be developer funded rather than taxpayer funded to achieve the same outcomes as a neighborhood plan would ultimately achieve. So for all those reasons, staff recommend canceling the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan formally. We can inform the community so that there's no thoughts about, well, where's that plan at? How's it proceeding? There's been a lot of good work that's been done with it, and we've been in discussions with the main developer in that area, and we would still use that good work as part of their future plans that they want to pursue for Johnson Heights. And then lastly, we would recommend that council prioritize the zoning bylaw for 2024. It's a very important project. It relates to Bill 44, and as council has indicated many times, this project is so overdue. It's decades overdue. It needs to get through, it needs to get done, and it will significantly help our housing situation on the market and non-market housing side. So that's the staff recommendation before we get into item 11C.
Okay. Any comments, questions from council? Councilor Palmer, you have your hand up, and then Councilor Lund.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Just further to the planner's comments, as far as being ahead of the game compared to most communities in the province, I suspect we're probably in the 95th percentile. And just because of all the work that the planning department has already done, and also because of policies with this council and the previous council already leading to a lot of similar initiatives that we were ahead of the province, quite frankly, on how we do more infill and create more affordable housing in the market. So I would really like to thank Paul Simon and his team for all the work they've done in the past couple of years, and that he can bring such an optimistic report that I suspect many other communities are going to be have some pretty strong words with the province, because it's going to put some communities in a very difficult position that aren't as far ahead as us. So that's my point. And again, thank you to Paul Simon and his team. Could I go just back to the previous slide? That's yeah, just a comment regarding DCCs. I hope that as we proceed, that these changes that will allow potential changes for more things in the DCCs, which would be a good thing, won't become an excuse to not get that DCC thing done. We are into multiple years, multiple promises over the years. We need to stay focused and get that done. There was recent promises. We've hired a consultant, And yes, there probably is more things, but we can't have another delay of years to do more studies to implement some of those things. That stuff needs to happen for sure, but we need to get our DCC update done. So that's my comment. It might not be shared around the table, but that's my concern, just because DCC issues been going on and on and on and on. And there's been multiple excuses over the years. Yeah, and then on the Johnson Heights, I'm really glad to hear that was inherited by the current planning department, basically from some ideas from the past. That was supposed to be done like 4 years ago or something. But it's something that just doesn't make sense. So I fully am supportive of that. And I'm fully support where the planning is going. And with that, Mayor Souls, I'll actually put the first motion on the table, the Johnson Heights Neighborhood Plan project be canceled.
Second for the motion, Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on that motion? Councillor Orlando?
Yeah, your worship, through the chair, a question of staff. What is the plan to communicate with those who participate in community members about the change, about the cancellation of the plan if it is canceled?
Through your worship, Councillor Orlando, we would certainly be working with our new communications director to understand what the best avenue is, but at the bare minimum, obviously updating Talk Revelstoke, social media posts, there's a mailing list that people had signed up for, and we have a generic mailing list as well for a lot of community leaders that have participated in a lot of different planning exercises over the years, so we would make sure that they were all informed, and planning staff have given some thought towards whether or not we do a full mail out to everyone within the Johnson Heights community with just a standard one-page letter to say, here's where we're at. If you have any questions, come into the planning group and we're happy to chat. We want to make it really clear though, all the work that had been put into the neighborhood plan will still be used. It'll just be used in a different capacity where it's a developer funded project rather than a city funded project essentially.
That is your question.
Yeah, your worship, thank you, and just an observation. I think it's really important, especially for residents who engage and don't really have any development background or involved in the development community, or just interested in what's going to be happening in their neighborhood, to to make sure we outreach to them to sort of explain in clear, understandable terms why the changes are being made.
Any other comments or questions from council? Councillor Louisa.
Thank you, Mayor Schultz. Yeah, in regards to this, I understand that we don't want to use taxpayer funds to move this Johnson Heights neighborhood plan forward, and with this new legislation and how that affects the Johnson Heights community is definitely in question. Could this be deferred to be collaborated with a future developer instead of canceled? Would that be easier to send out to the community?
Through your worship, Councillor Lucio, you could do it that way. I think that it might cause some confusion because the comprehensive development plan process under our new development approvals procedure bylaw is very separate from what a city-led neighborhood planning process would look like. They achieve similar outcomes in the end, and the public is engaged in a similar way, but they run different paths forward from a processing perspective. So I think it might cause some confusion. If it's canceled, as long as we communicate it in a way that doesn't give the impression that all the work that had been put into it is just going to sit on a shelf and never be used again, because we've already been chatting with one of the primary developers in that area. They're already using all the work that's been done in preparation of their future development application. So we want to make it really clear that the work hasn't been for nothing. And it has helped also inform different land use policies within the OCP. So it really has been a crucial project. It's just at this point, it doesn't make sense moving it forward from the planning group's perspective. So we would recommend keeping it as canceled, but it's just about how we communicate it out to achieve what you're trying to achieve there.
Okay, yeah, I would support just that communication coach to those community members about comprehensive development, essentially leading to the same process.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Number 2, please, Councillor Cherry.
Move that planning staff prioritize the zoning bylaw comprehensive rewrite project for 2024.
Second for the motion, Councillor Devlin. Any further discussion on this motion? I think this is the prudent thing to do. This is what we need to get done with the new government legislation. We need to go down this road, and allowing our staff to get working on this or continue working on this moving forward really is the best thing we can do. Councilor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just one comment, even without the provincial legislation, this is our number one way we can make some changes in our housing in this town. So this has been a priority for most of council, even without the provincial legislation.
All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Simon, for that. Let's move on to item C.
Thank you, Your Worship. So item 11C, Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act, Bill 35. Imagine we'll have a good lengthy discussion on this one as well, and it's certainly warranted. So starting off again, similar format, a quick summary of the legislation for council and the community. Bill 35, the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act, received royal assent on October 26, 2023. Some of the key changes that are applicable to Revelstoke include the following. Our municipal ticket information offenses under our bylaw can now be increased from $1,000 per offense per day to $3,000 per offense per day. That applies across the board, not just with respect to short-term rentals. It's a general update to our enforcement abilities. That received the order in council on December 6th, I believe Mr. Gibson told me. And I know his team on the bylaw front is going to be looking at how we can implement that to further strengthen our enforcement tool belt. Province is going to be creating a registration platform where all short-term rentals must register and share data with local government and host platforms. Doesn't matter what the platform is, if it's Trivago, I don't know all of them, but Airbnb, VRBO, they have to remove listings that don't have a valid business license. And the way the province is rolling this out is they're starting with communities that already have a business licensing scheme. So Revelstoke, because we again are slightly ahead compared to some other municipalities on this front, we have a business licensing scheme, so we will be brought into the fold of this registration platform. The protections for legal non-conforming short-term rentals, in layman's terms, grandfather. That's what it means. They no longer apply. So for Revelstoke, we don't have, planning staff actually haven't come across any what would currently be classified as legal non-conforming, meaning they complied with the regulations of the day at some point. The city then changed the regulations and brought them out of their conforming status. They continue to operate because they were legal at one time, and the city is the ones that caused them to be illegal. Where this really impacts Revelstoke is should council in the future decide to change any of our short-term rental rules, operators will be required to comply with those new rules. So as an example, all the spot zones that we have scattered throughout the community, if council said we want to peel back those entitlements, they would be required to abide by the new rules that says you no longer can operate a short-term rental. Under the existing legislation before this was changed, if we did that, we could still go ahead and do that, but they're protected as a lawful non-conforming, i.e. grandfathered use. So it doesn't really impact anything as it sits right now, but it could have substantial impacts depending on how council wants to change and tweak our existing regulations. So the legislation on top of that also introduces a new principal residency requirement where if you're going to be operating a short-term rental, it can only be operated out of your principal residence. Very important. This is not applicable to Revelstoke as a resort municipality. No resort municipality has this applicable to them. However, we are allowed to opt in via council resolution if that is a path that council wants to go. If we opt in, there's no short-term rental unless it's your principal residence. That is defined as the place where you spend the majority of your time. There is no minimum requirement in the provincial legislation. It's just wherever you spend the majority of your time. If you have 10 houses and the most time you spend at any one of them is 1 month, you live there for a month, you can short-term rent it for 11 months out of the year. If you have 2 houses and you spend 7 months at one, you can live there for 7 months and short-term rent it for 5 months. This is used as, you can think of it as the floor for local regulations. We can build on top of it more prescriptive measures. For instance, no more than 1 short-term rental per lot. Short-term rental is only permitted within a secondary suite, etc. But we cannot, and this is really critical with the legislation, we cannot introduce more lenient measures. If we opt into the principal residence requirement, it's applicable everywhere except for our resort lands. Opt-in is done on an annual basis. So for the first year, we need to make a decision by February 29th, 2024, and the principal residence requirement would take effect May 1st. For future years, you have to opt in by March 31st with the requirement in effect by November 1st. So you can see you can opt in, opt out on an annual basis. Could only imagine the havoc that would potentially wreak with some of the operators if it was constantly flipping back and forth. So really important that we look at this methodically, logically, and we are pragmatic about it. Couple other important pieces with the legislation. Condo hotels, so stratified hotels, the rental pool are exempt from the principal residence requirement should the city decide to opt in. And then overall condo hotels and bed and breakfast, they're required to register with the future provincial platform. So if you're operating a B&B, you have a house, you're renting out a couple of rooms within your principal residence, you still operate as a B&B, but you are still required to license your B&B operation with this provincial registration platform. Timeline for this. So October 26 is when the legislation received royal assent and order of council's passed December 7th, not the 6th, sorry. February 29th, as indicated, that's when we need to tell the province and needs to be endorsed via council resolution if we decide to opt in. For the 2024 year, May 1st is when the principal residence requirement, if opting in, would come into effect. The changes to the legal non-conforming protections take effect May 1st, and the requirement to display a valid business license with listing takes effect. We already have that in our business licensing bylaw, but this is just a requirement from the province now. Throughout summer 2024, that's when we can expect the province to release their data sharing platform, as well as enabling provincial support for local governments where they introduce a process to delist properties that don't have a valid business license and are advertising. I'll note that Revelstoke staff we've already had, I believe, 3 meetings with provincial staff to be part of creating this registration platform to make sure it addresses our needs. And staff are very adamant on pushing this forward in a way and making recommendations that don't impose additional resource requirements on the local government. We are looking for the province to provide that support and for the host platforms to provide that support so that it reduces our overall enforcement burden and puts that burden predominantly, ideally, on the host platforms. Then in late 2024, that's when the registry will launch and platforms will be required to remove listings without a valid provincial registry number. So staff do recommend that we defer a decision on revisiting our current short-term rental framework for Revelstoke until October 2024. So it doesn't mean we're going to start the project in 2024. We're recommending that we come back as this has been rolling out through 2024, as these additional provisions are implemented, and we see how everything is playing out, that we have that conversation again in 2024 for consideration of whether or not this becomes a primary project to be completed through 2025. So part of the reasons for this is staff capacity in 2024, as we have discussed, is quite limited. We are currently underway with a zoning bylaw project. Short-term rental regulations, if we are updating our STR framework, that will involve substantial zoning amendments as well. The confusion that has the potential to cause with members of the public when we have a major zoning bylaw project being undertaken, and then in parallel, we have zoning amendments that we're pursuing for short-term rental. We definitely see the potential to cause confusion and overlap between the projects in a way that doesn't solicit the best feedback from the community where they're really understanding what we're trying to achieve with each project. The zoning amendments to address Bill 44 are required by June 30th, 2024. That is, again, going to take substantial work from the city. And if we start working on short-term rental regulation updates right now and public engagement for it, there is the risk that we don't hit that deadline. An updated short-term rental regulatory framework is currently unbudgeted. So we've done some preliminary analysis, reaching out to different firms to try and understand what the cost would be to understand the economic implications of opting into this principal residency requirement. We will be looking somewhere probably in the ballpark of about $40,000 to $60,000 for a robust economic study. And this doesn't include support with bylaw preparation or public engagement, which we would recommend completing predominantly in-house. However, it's an unbudgeted project right now. So that certainly does pose challenges for the budget process that council has currently been going through. The decision to opt into the principal residence requirement can be done annually. So it's not like it's a one and done in 2024. We can be thoughtful about this. We can get through some of the work that we have, revisit this issue, and then if council and the community decides opting in is in the interest, then it's not like that opportunity is lost forever. We will see further implementation of Bill 35 throughout 2024. If we implement a lot of changes, let's say by October or November this year, and then the province finishes implementing the legislation, we might have to revisit some of those changes and have further bylaw amendments, causing more confusion with the public. And then lastly, we just updated our STR framework in April 2022. It is quite robust. It is quite prescriptive and prohibitive of new short-term rentals within the community. And so staff will be recommending, let's work with the province on implementing their registration platform. And let's enforce the rules that we have right now and continue to further analyze whether or not those rules are working. And as this legislation gets fully implemented, then we can revisit to see whether or not changes are warranted to that STR framework.
Good, Councillor Stickners.
A question through the chair to Mr. Simon, what you're proposing right now, how would this impact development that's, for example, Mackenzie Village? How would that impact those guys and their development plans?
Through your ship, Councillor Stapenhurst, can't speculate on what a developer will or will not do based on work that the city is undertaking, but there would be no impact to their current development rights that they have as of right now. So whether or not that gives them the confidence to continue moving forward, what we've committed to the community is that we will be recommending a methodical, thoughtful process to addressing this legislation and specifically the opt-in, opt-out opportunity that the city does have. Making sure that we are understanding the unintended consequences. And to be quite frank, there's no way we will fully understand those consequences by February 29th. It's not feasible.
Follow up, Council.
No, thank you.
Council Chair.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair to Mr. Simon. I'm just curious with all the legislation that's been passed, I said it in the last couple of weeks or months. Does it block the potential for a public hearing on the STR bylaws? With it being, it's kind of ambiguous language. I can't find the answer.
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, our understanding as of right now would be no. Now, it's me kind of thinking through it on the spot, but my understanding was no, because the intent of that restriction on public hearings is for site-specific rezoning applications where someone's coming in and they're going from, single family zone to a townhouse zone that aligns with the OCP. This would be broader citywide zoning amendments that they might not even necessarily be applicable to individual zones, but rather the basic provisions up top in the zoning bylaw that apply to all zones.
Okay, and I meant specifically the opt-in clause.
Through your worship, no, so the opt-in, opt-out clause, that's just done via council resolution. That doesn't require any zoning amendments. There's no formal requirement for a public hearing. If council opted to host something comparable to a public hearing, I would defer to the corporate officer to understand the proper processes for that. If we can hold public hearings on items that the legislation doesn't call for a public hearing, you could certainly have public info sessions where you invite the public to come in and chat. I don't know, Ms. Floyd.
I won't hold you to that.
Off base there.
On the spot.
But one thing that's really important, through your worship, if I may, this decision on opting in, the potential implications, they go far beyond the individual units that are entitled to short-term rental. There's furniture suppliers, photographers, cleaning companies, hot tub installers in this community that are reliant on the short-term rental framework and the operators within the community, not to mention ancillary impacts. We have restaurants downtown that see benefit from increased visitation, and really understanding if we just put a stop to all of that as of May 1st, what are those impacts going to be? We don't know yet. So staff really recommend that when we delve into this, we do commission some type of economic study to really get at the heart so that the community and council are well informed to understand, we opt in, what are the potential unintended consequences associated with that, with well-meaning intentions, right?
Thank you for that. Go back to those two words, unintended consequences, right? Look at that. All right, any other questions, Councillor Orlando?
Your worship, through the chair, point blank, I'm gonna ask where the February 29th deadline came from the province to indicate the desire to opt in. And just a little bit of background on my part, I did attend, as other councillors did as well, some of the info sessions that the province put on standard process for provincial legislation is, they pass the legislation, then it goes to regulation where they figure out how they're going to implement it. And certainly on one of the info sessions I attended, you've learned about where they're at. So for example, as an anecdote, their digital tracking platform is under development and they do not know how they're going to, or they haven't unveiled how they're going to do that. So certainly that's a ways off. And once, it's one of many things you have to figure out where it's going to work out. But specifically the question on the opt-in deadline, it says February 10th, February 29th is indicate a desire to opt in by February 29th. And is that, that is not be ready to opt in by February 29th. That's just to let them know.
Your Worship, Councilor Orlando, it is staff's understanding that we would need to have a resolution passed prior to February 29th and inform the province by February 29th that the city is opting in. So council would have to pass that via resolution, is our understanding. And where that deadline came from, my best guess would be the province needs 2 months after understanding all the communities that are opting in to enforce this. If I had to wager a guess, we implement new regulations at City Hall all the time through council. The challenges that we encounter on administering these regulations, even when they're relatively straightforward and the nuance to it is substantial. I would wager a guess that we are in for some substantial growing pains through 2024 as the province implements this legislation. They are very tight deadlines.
Councilor Stippner, and then Councilor Orlando, do you have a follow-up?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, so we need to opt in by February 29th, but what you're saying is that we're not gonna be able or ready to kind of revisit the regulations until October. So what kind of a position does that put council in right now?
Through your worship, Councilor Stapenhurst, what staff are recommending is that we keep status quo. We already have quite robust regulations in place. And if council, in a scenario, if council opted in before February 29th, we would need to immediately start working on zoning amendments, because when you opt in, the way the legislation is worded, it applies citywide. So we would essentially be opening the door to short-term rentals everywhere within this community, not just 1, 2 short-term rentals per property. So staff would then need to immediately prepare zoning amendments to further restrict that floor requirement of the principal residency requirement to say where it's permitted within the city, how many short-term rentals are permitted per lot, are they permitted in garden suites and carriage suites? So you can see the complexity and the nuance, and I strongly recommend against that, just because staff are still trying hard to understand if we went that route. The legislation on top of current bylaws, on top of future amendments to the bylaw, we're still trying to understand that. I would feel terrible for the average member of the public that's trying to navigate that process when there's so much in flux right now. So we're recommending, let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's work with the province on their registration platform. And in October, as we continue to understand how the rollout of this legislation is going, we can have a similar discussion to what we had today. And if council says this is a really important project and we have more data now and we have more insight and we want staff to be thoughtful and methodical about this and begin working on it immediately, then we can have it in the 2025 budget. We can do a proper economic impact on it. And, it might mean that if council decided to opt in at the end of this, we might not be opting in until the 2026 season. And if that's the case, from planning department's perspective, being methodical and thoughtful about this is a much more prudent path than trying to rush it within a couple months right now.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Councilor Orlando, did you have follow-up on your questions?
Sure, that's like.
Your Worship, Mr. Black just indicated very astutely. I've been in contact with the other resort municipalities, and our understanding is that the vast majority of them, just about all of them, I think, except for Nelson, where they're kind of dabbling with the idea, no one is considering opting in at this time. So I think everyone's kind of playing the wait and see game. And I would say that Revelstoke, in my opinion, is a little bit ahead because we already have quite prescriptive framework that was in place since April 2022.
Appreciate that. Councilor Orlando, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Your Worship, I have a couple more questions. One thing that was through the chair, question for staff. One thing that was clear to me in the conferences with provincial staff was this concept of these rules being the floor. So this is the minimum of restrictions and that you're free to add more on top of that. And also as discussed today, we're not allowed to be more lenient, so we can't sort of figure out a way that's kind of get around it. That's not going to be accepted. My question is this: is what does the second one really mean? Like more lenient? Is it just related to? It's not just the opt-in clause. This is everything. Like so maybe if you can have a little bit more explanation on what is off the table, just so we're not scheming about it until October, if that's where this goes to.
No, certainly, through your worship, Councilor Orlando, excellent point. So these 4 changes here, the increase in MTI, provincial registration platform where all STRs must register, host platforms delisting if they don't have a valid license, and then the legal non-conforming. This is all applicable to Revelstoke regardless. And these aren't things that we would necessarily build in more restrictive or more lenient regulations towards. It is the principal residency requirement.
Okay.
If we opt into it, that is what is the floor.
Okay.
That is where we can only build more restrictive and we can't have more lenient. For example, council cannot decide to opt in and then say, you know what? We're going to opt in for everyone in the city except for this one part. We've already zoned it for whole home rentals and we're going to say they're not subject to the principal residency requirement. We can't do that. And we have multiple CD zones, even when you exclude the resort lands, that we have accommodated whole home rentals under. That if we opt in, all of those are now required to be operated by a permanent resident.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lucia, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sills. With the registered business license, is the online platform responsible for taking down the ones that don't have a business license? What's their time frame for doing that? And is it up to us to point that out to them when they are up on their platforms?
Through worship, Councilor Lucio, again, really great questions, and staff have had the same questions. These are the nuanced conversations that we're having with the provincial staff behind the scenes about implementing this registration platform. And what we have communicated to the province is, if you say that the onus is on the local government to do an investigation the way that we would to verify no valid business license and go through a whole process and try and track down the operator, and then if that doesn't work, then go to the host platform, and if that doesn't work, then go to the province, which is based on indications we've heard, kind of what their preliminary thoughts were. So the legwork is all on us to really implement this. We've recommended against that. And we've said this needs to be a situation where if someone doesn't have a valid business license, we reach out to either the province or the host platform. There needs to be a very easy avenue to do that. And the checks and balances from the local government's perspective need to be minimal for us to provide, because we need to be able to delist them quickly. If I'm a member of the public and I'm upset that someone is advertising without a license and it takes 3 weeks for it to come down, that's unacceptable. It should be within 24 hours, 48 hours maximum. So that's the feedback that we've provided to them. Whether or not that gets included in the final process for the registration platform and the delisting process, that remains to be seen right now.
Councilor Chair.
Thanks, Worship. Just to build on that quickly, in part of these nuanced conversations you're having with the province, can you ask how they're going to eliminate the loophole that we've seen in Toronto and Quebec City, where they just type in any number 0001 as their business license, and all of a sudden the host is able to provide it?
Through your worship, Councilor Cherry, they have indicated that they are working with a third-party verification platform to try and get around that. But what we really, from the development services team's perspective, what we really envision this as is, on a weekly or a monthly basis, we should have a very easy, streamlined process that we go through, and anyone who's advertising without a license, or we send, here's our updated licenses, delist anyone who doesn't have one. It should be very easy for local government to put the onus, in my opinion, on the host platforms to remove the non-compliant operators rather than externalizing those costs to the local government enforcement department and taxpayers. It should be on the host platform.
All right, any other questions regarding short-term rental? Someone want to put the motion on the table for me in number 1?
Through your worship, just if it's okay, really quickly, I just wanted to make note, because council did pass a resolution on, I believe it was November 28th, recommending or requiring staff rather to host a public information session. And we still want to hold that public information session regardless of today's outcome. depending on direction from council, it would change the potential timing of it. But if council agrees with staff's recommendation, let's push off a further conversation to October. We would be hosting the public info session. Tentative date right now is February 6th, so Tuesday, February 6th. We'd still want to talk to the public, say, here's our current framework, here's an overview of the legislation, here's next steps. We'll be revisiting it in 2024, October, and then answer any questions that the public may have. So we are still keen to do that public info. It's very important to host it with the public.
Council Plummer, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to put the first motion on the table, that a decision to complete a comprehensive review of the existing short-term rental regulations be deferred until October 2024.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Lucelle. Any further discussion on this motion? Councilor Orlando.
Yeah, your worship, just want to share my thoughts on this. I think it's really hard for staff to, I was unaware of this February deadline requirement. I think it's going to be really hard for council and staff of the city, given our workload, to meet that deadline. I guess I just would want members of the public, to know that so much of what the province is planning has not been completed or has not been rolled out. They've outlined a schedule running through the year of when they're going to meet certain targets related to implementation of this legislation. So for that reason, I find that delaying until October is reasonable. I would have liked to have it move forward, but looking specifically at the deadline requirements, it's just too much by February 29th. But a further thought, and this is just a comment to council, is that one way or the other, we will need to deal with this. I think it's incumbent on us to deal with this sooner than later. And I think the main thing that's driving that thought is that when it comes to, we all want to build tax base, we want to build homes, we want to build places. We want to build more homes for people, but if you're looking at buying a product right now and you feel that the price is elevated by $200,000 because it has short-term rental zoning or the potential for it, then if I'm a young family looking to buy that, I'm going to defer that decision. Likewise, if I'm thinking, oh, hey, I'm going to buy this and rent this out, same thing. I want to defer that decision out of fear of regulatory risk, which is very real right here. So I think we need to deal with it as soon as we can. But I feel that just given everything else we're doing, on the whole, it would be probably ill-advised and a bit too much to take it on right away by February 29th.
Thanks for the comment. Councilor Dumont.
I just wanted to echo some of those sentiments. I'm not particularly thrilled that this has to be deferred until October, but I do recognize that it does have to be deferred until October. Planning staff has, what was it, 11, 15, something like that, projects on their plates, very big ones. We have a list of them here. It's a lot. I would not want to defer any of those things that are already in the works to have this conversation, because we do have to have a wholesome conversation about it for some reason. But yes, we do. So I'd just like to echo, I would like to get this done sooner, but we can't. So I would support this, because support of staff is a very important thing sometimes.
Great, appreciate that. Any other comments? We have the motion on the table. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's passed unanimously. Thank you. Someone want to put number 2 on, please? Councilor Devlin?
Council be presented in October 2024, detailing the status of the implementation of new provincial regulatory measures for short-term rental, and how a short-term rental review can be embedded in the 2025 Planning Department work plan.
Second for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time and for your work in getting this to us quickly after the government put their bills on the table. All right, moving on to correspondence. 12A, still got call for nominations. Any comment from councillors regarding that? Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, On this one as well as the next one, if I may jump ahead, is this something we can just put on an agenda item for future a near-term committee of the whole meeting, especially the resolutions? I know that the corporate officer has been collecting some of our wants and asks for provincial lobbying.
Any comments, Ms. Floyd?
Yes, your worship, through to Councillor Orlando, there is a deadline for to sit on the board for SILGA of February 29th. So that should probably, it could go to the February 13th
13th, yeah.
committee of the whole meeting. And in terms of the next one where the resolutions, that's mostly just to put an idea in your head to start thinking about what you want to bring forward to SILGA in terms of resolutions. So I can add it to that as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, awesome.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor. So yeah, further to Councillor Orlando, I think we could actually have that dialogue even on Thursday, because committee of the whole is pretty light as well. But anyway, I'm go along with whatever the majority decides.
So let's put that off till February if we can. Or is that gonna be too far?
I prefer.
I can give this more time than
Yeah.
2 days.
Okay, let's do that. All right, do you need a motion for that?
Might be a good idea.
So do you want to put a clear motion on?
Yeah, I'm looking to that. I move that the correspondence items be scheduled for consideration at our February committee of the whole.
For the SILGA call for nominations and for resolutions.
Yes.
Okay, seconder for that motion, Councillor Stapehurst. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Wildside Green Burial Support Letter, I'll speak to that. Wildside has sent a letter to us. I've done an interview with our seniors resource network, Ms. Stovall. Definitely, this is something that I've been working with this city on for many years. We have a section of the cemetery that is in a natural state and would lend itself well to green burial. It's already surveyed, it's ready to go. We may need to put one load of crushing to get a vehicle down or a loader down into that sort of thing. But it's what our community has been asking me for the last several years. And so I'm very supportive of this. Had some conversations with Mr. Black on this and feel that it lines up with what communities are wanting, what their new wishes are. We have a new demographic, or even my generation, the baby boomers, are now saying, hey, we want options rather than what we call the traditional way of burial. We'll still have our traditional ways of doing things with interment and cremated remains and burial in the other part of the cemetery, but definitely this part I think is well suited for that, and would suggest that we can do that with minimal cost and pretty much as long as we follow government regulation. And I think we're doing everything that we already are. And so we could just basically bring that forward and put it in play. Any comments or questions from council regarding that? And none, I'm going to ask if there's a general support for me to work with city staff as a former funeral director to make sure that we follow all regulations according to the BC Funeral Services Act and put things in play. Is going to be really something that our community is asking for. As long as we follow legislation, should be very simplistic.
Your worship, would you like something more formal as a motion?
I absolutely would. That gives direction for Ms. Floyd. So if
I'd gladly put that on the table, but wordsmithing's on the.
Okay. So basically that council support us moving forward with a natural burial section in our cemetery. And second for that motion, Councillor Stapehurst. Any further discussion on that? Do you have any other questions? Councillor Orlando.
Hi, thank you, your worship. Just a question, on our current budget, we had, similar initiative. Is this over and above the initiative that's earmarked there? Or is it
Yeah, well,
different?
what we had on the budget was talking about more crypts for cremated remains. And that's a whole different thing. And then we talked about briefly about natural burial, but I don't think that was in any budget discussion. Because there really shouldn't be any costs for us to implement this. The section of the cemetery is already surveyed out. We'll use the existing equipment that we have to do the interments. We may not go down as deep, and then we would actually mound up the soil afterwards and leave it in its natural state. And our staff may even come up with some ideas to sell natural plantings to put back on that grave so that it remains in that natural state. We're not talking about going in and taking out all the trees. We're not talking about going in and putting green grass, that sort of thing. That's not what we're discussing. Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Do you anticipate that this would be in place? So imagine there's some bylaw changes that are needed. Are you anticipating this to be in place for 2024 or just the
Yes.
planning done?
I'm anticipating that we could get it in place for 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? You have a follow-up, Councillor Lam?
Yeah, there's no budget implication. This isn't going to have any additional
No.
costs, just a question.
No.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Being none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to communications, SOGA 2024 Constitution amendments. Any comment on that? Seeing none, I will move on to council memorandum with BC Transit consolidation. So, Mr. Black, do you have any comments on that?
No, your worship, I do not. I just directed it, I believe it was a December 12th meeting. Staff reached out. I personally reached out to the Caribou Kids Club and to Ms. Gowler at the Arrowhead School After School Program. We will continue to work with our constituents and making sure that the system is operated at the best that we can with this new change.
Great, Councillor Doyle.
No, I just want to say thank you for taking that seriously. I mean, it's good to see new programs come together. We obviously see this as an improvement to our transit, but we still also listen to the concerns of the public and address them. So thank you for taking time out of your day for that.
Great. Councillor Stiffners?
Yeah, I'd like to also echo my gratitude for Director Black's quick response to the concerns that were raised by the community. I think it's still a little early after Christmas break to see how the changes are going to be implemented and how they affect the riders that use that system. But I look forward to hearing more from the public in regards to whether or not we're meeting their needs. So thank you again.
Great, thank you. Any other Councillor Lucien?
Thank you, Mayor Sills. I just have a question about the monthly transit passes, bumping up to 50 passes per month. And these are available through City Hall and the Community Center. Is there any requirements or restrictions on who can access these monthly bus passes?
To my knowledge, no, they are only adult passes. I believe the 12 and under is still discounted. And if there's a need for additional services above and beyond for those folks that need additional services, we have the handy door.
Okay, and are you, with the 50 monthly passes, are they just available on the first of the month and it's just a first come, first serve? And as soon as they're gone, they're gone? Are you able to reserve one for following months for the people that rely on the transit as a form of transportation?
Through your worship and council, the passes are available. I'm not certain if it's as day 1 of the month or if it's a day 15 of the month and it's good for 30 days or not. I believe it's period. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we had more passes than the original 10 that we consistently carried before. because now anybody can ride either system with the bus pass at a reduced cost. I'm not certain that answers your question, but we wanted to make sure that we did not run out of these passes, given that the system is combined and it appears that the ridership is above what we would expect for the system at this time last year compared to this time this year.
Okay. And how it was the process, like, do they have to fill out any paperwork or is it just requested from the? Okay,
Cash.
okay, thank you.
Good. Any other comments on BC Transit? Councillor Lyon.
Your worship, yeah, through the chair, I have a clarification question on just that last point, but my main question will come after that clarification question. Are those 50 passes, those are not free passes or discount passes, those are just passes? I wasn't quite sure from the report, but my main question is this, is that it seems that in order to get the accessible buses into operation requires decision downstream or a decision by BC Transit, I assume, to commit to that. Is that correct or is that wrong? And I'm trying to ensure that we can have those accessible buses available as soon as they are available. So I'm just seeking clarification on what needs to happen to make that so.
To your worship, to Councillor Orlando. The procurement of the buses is under the BC Transit office. As council authorized the combination of the system or combining of the systems, that was the same discussion in which buses were then going to be allocated. And that recommendation would go to the province through their legislative process. All of the systems would then have X number of buses. The province would then authorize that through legislation and budgeting. If that all happens in the way that we hope, they would then enter into an agreement to procure those buses. And then once they are here, to distribute them to the operator and the systems that requested those new buses. There's a lot of moving parts there that are above and beyond our control. Using the existing equipment that we have, only a few of the buses were accessible. The shuttle buses generally are not accessible, that you don't have a ramp. And so we're forced to utilize the existing equipment that we have for this year. As soon as we do get the new buses, they will all be accessible. Hopefully for next one.
Okay, so they will be next year. They will be accessible. I think I just have a hard time thinking that BC Transit in this day and age would not provide accessible buses. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sure. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, Ms. Belisel, do we have any questions from the press?
There are no questions from the press, Your Honor.
Thank you. I'd like to move in camera pursuant to section 90.1K of the Community Charter. Councillor Stapenhurst, Councillor Luciao, and all in favor? Motion's carried. We'll move in camera, and we're going to take about a 10-minute break before we go in camera. Thank you all. Thank you for your attention today.